I'm Kelsey Litchfield, and this is the Field Advisor Podcast, where I talk with local experts to unpack the latest agronomy information and research, giving you the knowledge to make informed decisions out in the field. Welcome back to the Field Advisor Podcast. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, joined by a familiar face, probably for many of you. He's been on the podcast before, and we just keep finding more topics to talk about, Connor. So Connor Sible, research assistant professor in crop production, who's looking at corn, soybeans, high yield, and works with Fred Below a lot, if you've heard him. He's on the campus this morning. So good morning, Connor. Give us a quick update. What's going on in your neck of the woods? Any planting started? Give us an update.
Yeah, well, thanks again for having me. I think this is the second time we've done this podcast, so looking forward to the discussion. What's going on today? I look out the window, a little bit of rainfall, but that's all right. It's still early. I know some people are getting antsy. Planting progress reports come out, and I think we're at 1% corn and beans down in southern Illinois. I don't know if that'll go backwards based on the last few weeks, a week of weather, but we're excited. We got a lot of fun projects with what I'm doing with Dr. Below, some of that with Soybean Association. I think we're going to talk about that.
Yep.
But yeah, just really excited as the season gears up, all the seeds on site and ready to roll.
Ready to roll. So you're ready to go. Are you able to give us any sneak peek of what some of those fun projects are, or is it top secret?
So a little bit of everything. Hey, no, that's why I do love being at the university level, because we can talk about what we're doing. I'd say a few big highlights. A name to remember would be Jared Fender, and he's our senior research specialist. But what he has started and is doing in strip till at the replicated small plot research, but taking it up to more strip plot as well. We've got a lot of exciting projects on strip till, looking at different types of placements, how to place the fertility, shanks, coulters, and then he's taking it to the different genetic interactions, because pretty sure roots are important for nutrient uptake, and different genetics have different rootings. So strip till with Jared Fender is definitely one of our exciting big areas we're going after. We are still focusing on those variety and hybrid interactions, or what we call our MIP trials. Those go on our website every year. We have a new version of that coming out, so maybe I'll give you the sneak peek. We are doing our management trials, but you have to download the report this fall to see what we did. Continuing our work with the Illinois Soybean Association on tissue testing. I think we're going to get to that in a little bit as well. That's exciting moving forward. We've got a project with United Soybean Board on biologicals. And then we're doing a lot this year on phosphorus efficiency and sulfur use in corn and soybean. Those are definitely some of our big topics, and Sam Laskonich on our root characterization work. So I kind of rambled around about, but a lot of different fun topics, corn and soy, but those would be the big ones.
And I will say you're also working with Illinois Soybean Association. They have their on-farm trial network, which are doing sulfur. So I know you're helping out a little bit there. I know Stephanie mentioned she was going to run by you the protocol. There's a lot going on. And I think it's just to say, in this day and age, all those projects you just listed, farmers are curious. Some of them are trying them themselves, but you have the benefit of taking it to the university and being kind of that third party where you can try things, like you said earlier. Are you still seeing that farmer interaction with your studies, or how are you coming up with these ideas? Where are you getting them from?
From the farmers, because you can do the coolest, in your mind, research in the world, but if it has no real world applicability, it only goes so far. Like the tissue testing project, that's a farmer idea. They said, how do nutrients move different times in the season throughout the canopy? I said, I don't know. And then we put the project together, and Soybean Association helped with that one. The biologicals, we're doing a lot of testing on that area, and a lot of that comes from farmer curiosity. What are these products? How do they work? And will they work for my program, or should they work better for the neighbor's program? Because we do things differently. So a lot of the research is products and practices, and largely how they interact. The products are out there. Where we come from the farmers is, what practices are you most interested in trying to understand? So that's the bulk of the ideas really do come from the farm.
Biologicals, I imagine that's an interesting one every year. I keep thinking in my mind every time someone brings up biologicals, the circle graph, that's probably not the
Hmm.
right scientific word for it, but that Science for Success has of all the biological products that are out there. And I remember you said something last summer at our tailgate talk in Western Illinois, something about if you don't understand the active ingredients, don't put it on, or something similar to that. Do you remember what you said?
Exactly that, or along those lines. So often I hear, hey, here's this product, try it on 5 acres. Well, does that 5 acres need what that product does? Just like any input, does it, fertilizer or pesticides? I surveyed 155 products last summer, just, different companies, different web searches. And of 155 products, I documented 139 active ingredients. So it's a big pool. I guess where I would say we're cautiously optimistic
Okay.
because from a biology perspective, microbes, plants, soils, they all interact. This is, agronomy 101. What we're learning now is how to better identify which those microbes are, how they work, and then can we use that to create a formulated product. And it's just ensuring we do that in the right process at the right pace so that that final product really is ready for commercialization.
Got it. Yeah, a lot going on there and probably years of studies to come to truly learn. Okay, so let's talk about tissue testing. So, as you said, Illinois Soybean Association funded this project in 2024. You're doing it again here in 2025. You did speak at the Field Advisor Forum. So if people are interested and want to see the full presentation, they can go to YouTube, search Field Advisor, and Connor's presentations on there. I wanted to talk about it today because now we're going into the growing season. And I've talked with farmers, agronomists, retailers about tissue testing, and it seems like it's not a new practice, but what made you want to, you kind of alluded this earlier, why bring this up something to research? It seems like tissue testing kind of, maybe there's some years farmers might do it more or less. I'm just trying to get a feel of what the landscape is for tissue testing when it comes to the practicality for farmers.
Yeah, and I run into the same conversations, the same questions. Why should we be doing this? And if we do it, when should we do it? How should we do it? I think the best place to start would probably just be go back to why. Why is tissue testing a thing that we have the option to do? What are we doing it for? It really comes down to both corn, soy, and some in wheat as well. I know there's a lot of work yet to be pushed on that side. Nutrient status of the plant. We know that a good crop, a high yielding crop, needs a lot of nutrition to get there. And our soils have some of that, but we know they don't release it in timely manners, and therefore we supplement with fertilizer. Corn, we're most often fertilizing NPK, and now we're hearing that sulfur quite routinely. Soybean is interesting. A lot of us rely on what is left from the prior year's corn fertility strategy or just to scavenge from the soil and not fertilizing as much, meaning there could be opportunity to fill in the missing gaps. And this is where tissue testing comes in, especially on the micronutrients. The idea is if we go out, we sample the newer growth, because new growth would be where the current resources are being put. And if it's deficient in a certain nutrient, do we have the time to make a correction and apply a fertilizer, whether that's a foliar feed or a top dress? Then we can go do that and maybe hopefully correct it. And then if we sample a little bit later, has that deficiency gone away? So why we tissue test is to look for that hidden hunger. Is there a nutrient deficiency that we can't see with our eyes? And if there is, can we correct it?
Go ahead.
So the not been it's been around, but
Right.
we have basically one recommendation for how to do it. Sample the newest, most recently mature tissues from the top of the plant. And that's the same sampling recommendation. Should we be sampling elsewhere, different times, different parts of the canopy? Those are the unknowns in the project we put together.
I was talking to a guy in retail last night about testing. He goes, "Oh, I would do so many of them like in 2005, and it's just kind of fallen off." Is that just because they're not finding the benefit, or maybe is it just the practice? Like you said, you're trying to find new ways to
Hmm.
tissue test. So maybe there's just that uncertainty about it, and that maybe it can become a tool in the tool. I hate using tool in the toolbox. It sounds
Yeah.
so cliche, but it just, I find these farmers, they're like, I want to do high yields. I've done everything right. And maybe this is something that can, like you said, let them know what's missing in the field at the same time.
Yeah, and a little background too as to when people say, why you may or may not want a tissue test, why there might be ebb and flow as to the years when it's popular or when it's not. If you talk to those in the high yield competitions, those pushing on soybean for 150 bushels or more, they claim every week, every Monday tissue test. You get the
Mm.
data back by Thursday. You can make an application Friday, and you can check again the following Monday if you've corrected or if something else is now deficient. So those in the high yield systems really, really count on tissue testing in their data sets, and that's what they say is their success, is making sure that they never have a deficiency. So you hear those stories and then you think that must be what I need to do on my farm if I want to push for those triple digit soybean yields as well. And then sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Mm.
Heard a few things. If you're going to do it, you got to do it every week and keep up with it. A one-time point is like a band-aid, but it's not a permanent fix. The other philosophy is you pick the most critical time point, right? And most would say in soybean that's around that late R1 or in that R2 stage, right ahead of pod set. And we make a correction then to give the plant enough to keep the pods. Um, I've even heard from some that they can claim to predict yield with a V2 tissue test and the phosphorus concentration.
Hmm.
So a couple of things that come to mind. What is a tissue test? Maybe I should have started
Yeah.
with that. What is in that report? That report is a concentration. So that's how much of a given nutrient is in a given area of plant material or a given amount of plant material. It's the percentage of the biomass as that nutrient. Then we come up with these thresholds on how much we think there should be in the plant. And if you're above that, you're sufficient, you have more than you need. And if you're below that, you're deficient and you need more. The question then is, what is that critical threshold? What defines nitrogen, for example, a sufficient nitrogen test versus a deficient nitrogen test? If you go to the commercial labs, different labs have different ranges, but most of them agree it's 3.5 to 4% nitrogen would be good for soybean. If you talk to those in the high yield, they don't like it to go under 6. So
It all
that's, I think,
depends.
that's the first question is, what is that critical threshold? Why did we define it that way? A lot of the tissue testing is on the industry side, and if you go into the academic literature to try and find when were those critical thresholds determined, there's not much there. So that's one of the challenges.
So
And the
is there a
reason
need to do that then to find what that threshold is? So you're all kind of on a common ground, not depending on who you talk to.
and that's a great one. Is it the threshold or what some, and this is where I'll, my own ignorance and still catching up on it. Rather than the actual concentration, it's the ratios.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily what percent of nitrogen is in that leaf material, but relative to the sulfur, the phosphorus, the potassium, are the ratios out of balance, and that's the fix. And maybe that will be the solution. Is it no longer what's the threshold per nutrient, but what's the ideal ratios? And I don't think we fully understand that, at least not on a broad inference. Some have been tissue sampling with their customers for many years in the same spots, and that may work for that region, but does it translate to the next state? And the other thing that is a challenge to tissue tests, because it is a concentration, if you have more biomass, you can dilute it.
Hmm.
I'll give you a perfect example. We used to have the Quest for 150 bushel soybean trial on campus, and we would give it everything, as much nutrients as we thought it would take with fertigation, in-season foliars, Y drops, and we would really push for those yields. And I believe our record we achieved was 114 bushels. And next to that, we had our standard practice, 30-inch row, no fertility, let it scavenge. The standard practice had a higher nutrient tissue test across the board than the Quest plots. but there was a 50 bushel yield difference at the end of the year
Right.
because those Quest beans were massive. And so the concentration of the nutrients was less, but it doesn't mean there was less nutrients in the total plant. That's probably the biggest challenge to tissue testing is big plants can have a lower concentration, but does that really mean they are deficient or they're just growing fast and spreading it over a bigger area?
Is it interesting to you that we still don't have the answers to some of these questions given, I mean, planting, well, maybe not this year. We're planting less soybeans this year, but it's becoming more of a crop that people are managing similar to corn, maybe not as much as corn still. They're focusing in on a little bit more, but there's still these questions. We don't know a lot about what happens within the plant itself. Would you agree?
I would. And the good news there is questions means I still have a job to
Yeah,
go
there
answer
you go.
or a job security. I mean, the exciting thing too is as we evolve with soybean especially, it used to be treated as the rotation crop.
Right.
And those that were pushing it were tissue sampling, but perspective, probably a small percentage of total bean acres. Beans have a lot of potential. I think there's a lot we can do with soybean, and it's probably going to take nutrient management to get there. And I wouldn't be surprised if tissue testing is a solution to help us get there. But it comes back to now that we're looking at it as a yield crop, not a rotation crop, we do have to start defining, is it a critical threshold of concentration or is it a right nutrient ratios? And does that change seasonally and spatially within the plant? That's the questions we don't have.
So is one of your focuses is then to hopefully get some kind of standard when it comes to versus threshold versus ratios so that they can see that? I mean, I look at it and I see there's room for, confusion, error if we don't know what those are. So is that something you're focusing on to hopefully get an industry standard when it comes to looking at those numbers?
Yes, to put in short, I would hope
Yeah.
we can come up with a recommended threshold. And there's two ways this could go. We could find that the current recommendations are correct. Not to say that we're doing it wrong, just to say we've always done it that way. Should we be doing it another way? And I'd be happy to come back and say our data confirms the last 20 years methodology was correct. And we might find, though, that, hey, if we sample in a different part or look at ratios versus concentrations, maybe we can do better. Not to say also that what we're doing is wrong. It's the best with what we know at the time. So that's two potential goals.
Yeah.
Are we going to confirm the current recommendations are correct, or are we going to say there might be a better threshold that is an improvement?
Are you also doing soil samples at the same time to
We
compare with
are.
the tissue testing?
We are. And one of the things with this project that we're doing specifically is not as much testing. Does a tissue test give us deficiency to then correct? And did we get there? That's phase 2. We're in phase 1.
Okay.
Phase 1 is just better understanding which nutrients move in the canopy at what times. And that will then help us identify, is the top of the plant still the best? Or is the top of the plant where you need to sample for nitrogen and sulfur, but hey, it's the middle of the canopy that you need to go after if you're looking at phosphorus deficiency based on when those nutrients move.
One thing I want to talk about real quick, Connor, is going back to what you said, tissue testing needs to be done multiple times, not just one and done. And I think that's what I heard from people. They're like, tissue testing is just what's going on at that plant at that time, that day, depending on the conditions. But that's why you're saying, well, no, you need to go back, and whether you do it Monday at noon, like every week. But then also, how do you justify doing that when commodity prices are so low? Like, I mean, I know there's this common argument, and I've been seeing more and more high yield versus cost effective. I mean, is there a middle to that, or what's your opinion on that?
In low markets, two strategies. You reduce inputs as much as we can to maximize profitability per acre, or go all in and try and get through by compensating with more bushels. And then in the middle, though, is what do you do just to keep track of that? So I do see potentially this year, a year of tissue testing pulls back a little because it's an expense with no immediate return.
Right.
It's not an input. It's like a checkup at the doctor, but then you have to
Yeah.
follow up and do you listen to the doctor's orders or not? And that sometimes involves more investment beyond that. Where I like going back to the critical periods of development and right ahead of pod set, I mean, if you are to pick, is probably the best time. Because if you're deficient when you're making decisions on how many of these pods do I keep or give up, you want to convince the bean keep more.
So going to, you had a whole article. Tom did a great job in the Farm Progress article talking about tissue testing. And I want to you had a quote in there that, hold on, I just lost it. And there it is. In soybeans, there's time to pull tissue samples and make corrections if you find certain nutrients are deficient. So I also want you to clarify, maybe you see that nutrient's deficient, you decide to put on an application, you're not necessarily going to see the results that fall, correct, when the combine goes through, or will you?
It depends on the
Okay.
nutrient. Soybean is one of the challenges to soybean. The critical growth periods is a very extended time. And I think corn, there's some distinct time points. I mean, VTR1, we are pollinating, and there's like a 2 week window where we're going to decide how many kernels we're going to keep. The rest of the season is grain fill. Soybean being indeterminate, at the bottom of the plant, we're filling pods, and while at the same time at the top of the plant, we're still flowering. So it's making multiple decisions at the same time. This is why soybean and tissue testing, you might be able to make that correction in a 1 to 3 week period and have a change at the end on yield,
Okay.
because you might be too late for the bottom of the plant, but you could then make sure you maintain and increase yield at the top of the plant. And soybean can pretty much be sprayed with any type of ground rig. Corn, it's harder to make those
Right.
in-season applications, but because you have the ground application possibility in soybean, it's much simpler to make that correction. Few things I hear, the tissue test showed boron was deficient. We sprayed, came back and tested 2 weeks later, and the boron levels were up. Boron does not remobilize from leaves. So if you spray the fertilizer on the leaves, it's still going to be in the leaves. And of course, that tissue test will pick it up. So some nutrients do move from the leaves to the grain, and some just stay in the leaves and help the plant perform at a higher level. I think that comes down to kind of where we started. How do you interpret the test? Phosphorus and sulfur make grain. So those are some where you might see the movement from the leaves to the pods, and then can you keep that source going with the correction, or is it just hindsight for the next year? Hey, we probably were short
Right.
and we should make a change in next year's management.
You see a lot of retailers doing it for farmers, or do you see farmers just doing it themselves? What's been the read on that?
That's a good question. I think it is a little bit regional. If it's the retail locations or a lot of, I know, consulting agronomists are leading a lot of that because they're helping a lot with the interpretation and management of the data.
Right.
I think the majority would be retail and or contracted agronomists,
There
consultants,
you go.
less so than on-farm independent.
Gotcha. Okay, let's talk about what you found during your first year of results. What's some good um, uh, data that you might found, like some key highlights? Like I said, the full presentation from Connor. I know you were putting together that presentation last minute, and that was back in January. So we're now in April. You might have had time to look at it again, refresh your memory. So if a farmer were to ask you, okay, my checkoff dollars funded this, what did you find that can help me?
hmm Let's start with how to sample or where to
Okay.
sample. The general recommendation is most recently mature trifoliate. I mean, that quote is almost on every single commercial lab testing. How do you define most recently mature is what differs. And sometimes it's very specific with the recommendations, third node down from the terminal bud. Sometimes it's more vague with a diagram where it shades the leaves of where they recommend, but if you look closely, it's still not sure. Is that the third node, the fourth node? I mean, it's a little generic.
Mm-hmm.
So how we define most recently mature is the first question we wanted to tackle. Some claim it's when the three trifoliates separate from each other. And so if the three leaves are no longer touching, it's mature, it's opened up. Some use the color with their eyes because the new leaf material is lighter green in color, and as you go down the plant, it gets darker and green, more mature. So some just use a visual cue, the color, and it's typically about, I would say the third node down would be the most common, depending on how open that terminal bud is. Some may be pulling from the second node down if that terminal bud is almost opened itself. So that's typical recommendation.
Okay.
That's visual though, based on leaf separation and or color. What I wanted to look at was the biomass accumulation, because once they separate, the leaves are still expanding a little bit, but they're also gaining in their depth and specific leaf weight and putting on mass in the leaves. And one of the unique things we did was not just pull the leaves and send them to the lab. We pulled the leaves from 20 plants exactly every time, dried them and weighed them to get their actual biomass within the canopy. And what we found was, by a biomass perspective, you're probably actually most mature at the fourth node down, or like fourth to fifth. So that's probably the number one key finding from that work. Most recently mature might be one more below what you think you should be sampling. The recommendation then this year is to maybe do what you normally would do, keep that as sample A, and then go one leaf lower and send that in as sample B and compare the results. And do they give you a different outcome? So I think that's probably the number one highlight from the project findings in the first year. Maybe go one leaf lower on your sample.
Okay.
That's the big highlight. But then
Sure.
there's some interesting things within the nutrients that we found. Some things are obvious. As you go through the season, the older leaves are definitely losing their nutrient concentrations through time because they're moving them into those developing pods. So concentrations at the top of the plant were almost always higher than those at the bottom of the plant. And different nutrients moved a little bit differently. Nitrogen was pretty consistently moving over, we went out about every, I would say 10 to 14 days. We weren't on a weekly schedule. We were on a growth stage schedule,
Okay.
which is different as well.
Do you
But
recommend
nitrogen,
that too? Could
so
others do it, or was that just for the study?
with the sampling and the study approach, we wanted to go every 2 growth stages and
Okay.
sample pairs of trifoliates together for consistency, because when we were going back and sampling, we were resampling the lower canopies at the same time.
Gotcha.
And we needed to be sure that when I was comparing last week nodes 9 and 10, I'm comparing them to this week's nodes 9 and 10, and then next week's nodes 9 and 10.
Gotcha.
Most folks are just going out 1 week every Monday to the top. So you could be one whole trifoliate. If it's a really good hot humid week, you could have 2 more full trifoliates.
Okay.
And so, yeah, nitrogen for us moved pretty consistently, but maybe not very fast. Whereas phosphorus, it seemed to move really fast out of the leaves. So different rates of remobilization and at different times in the canopy. That comes back to the original question then. If nitrogen holds a little longer, do you need to do a phosphorus correction in 1 week? In nitrogen, you could wait for 2 weeks, start doing the economics, how many times you want to run the sprayer out.
Right.
Sulfur was really interesting. It was extremely sufficient in the upper canopy and extremely deficient consistently in the lower canopy. And we saw this with unfertilized and fertilized plots, the same trends. So we did look at with and without fertility to try and make sure we weren't sufficient. Boron didn't change at all because it doesn't move from the leaves. So the summary there is we did identify different nutrients move at different times, and when they move depends on where they are in the canopy. Why I think this is really exciting is we have new technologies where you could spray over the top and target the upper canopy, but there's undercovers or drops where you could target the lower canopy. And perhaps we need to be putting sulfur into the lower canopy, but that phosphorus and nitrogen into the upper canopy. That's where these different inferences and use of the tissue test in the way we're doing it might change.
Interesting. Would you imagine seeing that on fields where they just go underneath the canopy? Is that something you've seen, or it seems very precision ag tech like?
So the technology exists. I think it's largely more targeted on some corn
Okay.
rigs where you can put the boom up and then put drops and spray the center canopy. But we have setups on lab that we have upstairs we haven't used, but we've had them for a long time where it's drops that spray up and
Interesting.
hit the undersides of the leaves. And most of these just attach to typical spray rigs. So the technology's there, the equipment's there, and the current equipment's pretty, how would I say, adaptable. It wouldn't be too difficult to go from a overspray to putting drops that spray up.
Seems like a lot's going on in just that one soybean plant that you never would have thought, like how much is going on there. And like you said earlier, just proves we still have a lot of questions about it. I guess what has surprised you the most from this first year of study that just kind of came out of left field for you?
We did the unfertilized versus the fertilized, and I will say in East Central Illinois, our soils are pretty good, and the unfertilized soil test levels are decent. We were expecting with the fertilizer that we would have, sufficiency all the way through. What surprised me the most is that where we had fertilizer, the concentrations of all nutrients were higher than where we did not.
Hmm.
However, if you look at the trends in the canopy and over time, they were almost perfect in mirror images, which means that despite whether you're lower fertilizer levels or with full fertility levels, the plants were using the nutrients in the same manner and same way at the same times. And we had, I think it was about a 8 or 9 bushel yield difference with the fertilized versus the unfertilized. But the fact that they were using the nutrients at the same times in the same parts of the canopy gives me confidence that these tissue testing trends can translate across different yield levels as well. And we can use the data to say, now we know this, sulfur isn't moving in this part of the canopy, but it is here. So let's fix that and correct that, and
Okay.
it should be consistent. So that's what surprised me the most. Yeah, the fertilized and unfertilized, if you just mirror the patterns, they overlaid, except for one was at a higher level magnitude.
Got it. So that was 1 year of a study, just 1 year. You're
Yep.
heading into year two. Now, what's the focus? Is it to just redo it all again, see if you come up with the same results? Is there going to be a different focus, knowing what you know now from year one?
So we are doing it year two. Happy to say we brought Dr. Andrew Margonaut in on the project. There's some other questions about fertilized versus soil supply. There's been a fair amount of work done in corn, trying to understand, does corn prefer the soil or the fertilizer nutrients, or does that depend on the stage? So with his program and his team, they are going to do isotope labeling on the nitrogen and sulfur, and we're going to do that in our fertilized blocks. And that will help us say, not only when and how is the plant using different nutrients, but when they're fertilized plots, does it use the fertilizer nutrients first? Does it use them last? Does it take them up in equal proportions to the soil, and therefore it's just grabbing what's closest? So that'll be a new twist to the study in year two. They're also calling for some drier weather than we had last season, which in our case, because we are site limited, because it's a very, very sample intensive
Are you
study,
just in Champaign?
we are for
Okay.
now. And our goal here is to use Champagne to get those seasonal trends and fine tune where we think those target points should be. And then we'll use that in phase two to scale out to broader acreage on farm, making actionable decisions on should we put a correction spray out or not. And then now we also will be able to, with Andrew's component,
Yeah.
understand, is the fertilizer preferred or not preferred? Is it just making sure we have enough abundant nutrition out there and it takes an equal proportions? And so phase three would be then the tying it all together with a prescription map before planting, just yield goal. And this is when we're going to put these nutrients out, because we understand this is when the plant is moving them at different times. So
Should be
phase
very
one.
interesting.
Yeah, and I love this project because it is a three-phase. Phase one is just mapping, thinking that's the last 20 minutes that we've been talking. What are we doing? We're mapping nutrient movement and time through the canopy. Phase two is, does the current mapping match the current recommendations and compare corrections? And then phase three is just let's predict the exact patterns and see if we can really meet every need and now get 100 bushel beans. That's the goal and the dream. But
Yeah, good dreams. Connor, what did you get any farmer feedback after your forum presentation? Like any questions they had that you hadn't thought of, or What was their feedback after your presentation? I was trying to look back, and I think questions got cut short because we were running behind on time, but I'm just curious if you remember.
This project in general, partly I blame this on Field Advisor because your marketing is so great, and you're everywhere on Facebook and Twitter and promoting the projects, which thank you very much. That really helps promote our research program at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
This project, of all the projects, we started the conversation about what's your exciting projects. By far, I get the most emails, phone calls, text messages, Twitter direct messages about this project. There's a lot of interest in it because tissue testing is not an uncommon topic of conversation,
Right.
but there is so many different conversations about it, how to do it, what the recommendation is. Somebody's put a bunch of data in over 20 years and they have their model that they use, but does that work on my farm? So I would say farmer interest has been phenomenal. And the first year interpretation results have generally been well accepted of the idea most mature might be different. That seems to be pretty well accepted. And then the idea different nutrients move at different times. I don't think that's a shocker, but it's the exciting thing is they say we're putting numbers to it, and that's where you start.
Great. So if a farmer, for some reason, hasn't done tissue testing, where would you encourage them to start? Given also, we said earlier, given commodity prices right now and putting more inputs in might not be the best option this year, but if they are interested or for years to come, where do you recommend they start?
First thing I would start is look at yield trends over the last 10 years. And are your soybean yields going up and your corn yields? Because especially if we're in a rotation, that's higher nutrient removals. So if your yields have gone up, have you changed your fertility strategy, corn and beans? If not, that means you could be looking at higher removal rates, but not as much going back. And therefore, deficiencies, if we're not seeing them today, might start to show up. So just look at the last decade. How have your yields changed and compare that to have you changed your fertility approach on your acres? Then I would say do a tighter window look back the last 2 years. Visually, can you remember seeing nutrients that are deficient? Taking 2023 with a grain of salt, potassium deficiency was everywhere, but we were dry. So just that's the one nutrient I'd put a warning on. But last year you saw that sulfur streaking or some zinc deficiencies. That's a good indication you'll likely see that again if the yield's maintained and go forward. So start thinking about putting those nutrients into the strategy. Then we bring it now to current year. I mean, if I was to make a decision this year, what might I do with tissue testing? Prime time is right around about that R2 if you're going to do it once, because you're trying to catch the hidden hunger before we really make final decisions on pod set. Because of the indeterminate growth where we are putting pods at the bottom but flowers at the top, maybe later R2 would be the better timing to try and keep what we've started at the bottom, but make sure the plant's convinced it can do more at the top. And go from there using the standard lab recommendations today, because as I said, today, I cannot tell you that those lab thresholds are not correct. They might be.
Yeah, that's what you're figuring out.
Yep.
Great stuff, Connor. Thank you. Connor, the crop physiology has its own website at the University of Illinois. If you just Google it, you can see all the reports from last year. They do a great job on that. Field Advisor, we have the Research Hub. So if you can see Connor's, the whole project layout there. And then, of course, if you go on to Field Advisor, the YouTube channel, you can see Connor's full presentation with all the graphs and all that good stuff on the Field Advisor YouTube channel. Connor, is there anything else you want to leave us with?
Well, I just want to say thank you to listeners and to farmers. Keep the questions coming. I will throw one thing we did not touch on, SAP analysis. That's phase 4. So I understand that's a new way to tissue test. Folks are looking at considering it. We can indirectly get to that with our data set because we have the old and the new samples, but it's a slightly different approach. So there's also new strategies evolving, and we'll start to look at those down the road. But most importantly, I always just like to say, if there's a question you have, reach out. We'll see if we can get the project to answer it. And on the tissue testing, I'm probably going to start putting some surveys out. And so be looking for those. Yeah. I think that's the place to start. Are you tissue testing? Is it you? Is it your agronomist? And how have you used the data? What are your thoughts? But
you are on X. Yeah, I was going to say you are on X, Twitter. I would say that's probably one of your most active platforms, and you can get a hold of him there. And I'm sure if someone Googles you online, they can find your email address. But Connor, I'd say tissue testing is a project that just keeps on evolving. You might be on to phase 10. Who knows? It's just going to keep, every year's different. So we'll see what happens.
It is. But like I said, I think soybean has untapped potential. I mean, 200 plus bushels has been achieved. So let's get our 60 bushel average up to 75, right? We're excited to keep working with you, working on soybean and tissue testing in general. So
thanks, Connor. I will also say we don't have time to talk about it today, but I think we've talked about it before. Planting date. Connor has some good, interesting studies on planting date in soybeans. Real quick, I think you said which date in April has been the winning date on your sites this past year when it comes to early planting?
So the 3 years we did it, if we were after April 15th, but before May 1st, that was our win. 2 years ago, we went out April 12th, and we had a cold snap that brought us down a little bit, so that our early May was our best. But definitely the April 15th to May 1st window is probably going to be the best chance. I will say if you're earlier than that, though, it doesn't have to be the highest yielding, because if it's the same, you've bought time to then prioritize corn later. So
there you go.
The March beans are cool to see when you see the photos out there, but look at the weather we just had.
Yeah.
Not convinced that's put the whole farm in March yet, but comfortable with April 15th.
Okay.
Go for it. And if the weather forecast looks good, go a little earlier.
We're almost there, so planting season, I know, like you said, in the South has begun, but they might go backwards now. My heart goes out to them because I talked to one of our soy envoys this year, Mike Wilson. He said down in Gallatin County, they had 15 inches of rain. And that's unbelievable, and probably some real worry when the crop will get in.
Yep. Yeah. For those of us up north, be thankful for what we did get. Keep the soils full, but not too full.
Yep.
And our thoughts and prayers for those down south.
Definitely. Connor, thank you for taking time. I know you're on a busy schedule, but I appreciate you sharing this research with our listeners.
Thanks for having me, and I look forward to the next one.
Thanks for listening to the Field Advisor Podcast, unbiased, independent agronomy information to keep your farm moving forward. I'm Kelsey Litchfield, your voice from the field. This podcast is funded by the Illinois Soybean Association Checkoff program. Stay connected with Field Advisor on social media. Follow, like, and share to keep the conversation going. And don't forget to subscribe to the Field Advisor Podcast on your favorite podcast platform.